Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, continuing our summer scouting as we are in the Big 12, taking a look at the Big 12 champs, the Kansas State Wildcats. And Dill, this is a team last year, about 12 months ago, when we were doing summer scouting for Kansas State. It was a team that we were high on, not that high on. And Kansas State had a phenomenal year. Will Howard took over that quarterback position. I think it's unarguably that offense looked a lot cleaner. I'm excited to get into this program because you look at the Big 12 and it's really up for grabs, just kind of like it was last year. This is a deep conference, and any given Saturday you can win a game, but you can also lose a game. Excited to get into it now. Before we do, just want to say thank you to you guys. It's honestly just been so amazing the support you guys have shown, whether we're talking high school recruiting, whether we're talking the transfer portal, whether we're doing our summer scouting. You guys have been absolutely awesome. So if you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. That is the best way you can support the fellas. And another thing to add is my favorite part about doing this is kind of chopping it up with the fans in the comment sections of these specific teams, learning from you guys. So if you guys have a player that we are maybe sleeping on, let us know in the comment section. That's the best part about doing this. And Dill, without further ado, let's get into this team heading into 2023. What are your early takes here?
Yeah, I mean, they're losing a lot, obviously, and that's especially on that defensive side of the ball with some big-time contributors and a few at the skill spots with Deuce Vaughn and Malik Knowles. But Kansas State's kind of been a steady program that, again, they just absorbed that type of loss pretty steadily. They just do their thing. They have the culture in place. It's been in place since Bill Snyder. Chris Klieman certainly seems to keep that rolling. And again, like they're never going to be a team that's highly favored by like Vegas or any of the pundits probably coming into seasons, but they're always really competitive. And I don't have any reason not to think they won't be this year.
That's straight up what it is. And it's so funny about the Big 12 because you have teams that aren't as flashy like Kansas State and even Iowa State at times. And Vegas and the public always kind of like to gravitate towards the flashy teams like Texas and Oklahoma. And then you have programs like Kansas State where, like Chris Klieman coming over from North Dakota State, you can tell it's not a flashy program. It's not a program that the national media is going to talk about. But this is a damn good football program that's been good consistently under Chris Klieman. You look back at that hiring, for me, hand up, like a little bit of a head scratcher, taking over the Kansas State job from North Dakota State, and they absolutely crushed the hire. I think Kansas State fans feel that this is the right guy to be leading Kansas State. And Dale, I want to start on the offensive side of the ball and the quarterback, Will Howard, who I think the biggest storyline for Will Howard coming into the 2023 season, this is something we've talked about with Michigan and J.J. McCarthy, is he's the unquestioned quarterback one. He's the unquestioned leader of this offense. And being able to take all those first-team reps in spring practice and summer camp and being that guy that the offense looks to be the leader, I think is going to make a massive difference in how Will Howard approaches this 2023 season.
Well, that's the thing. That's what makes what he did in 22 so impressive is that he wasn't even – I don't even know that it was really open for competition that much with him and Martinez. Like, I'm sure it was to an extent, but when Martinez came over from Nebraska, I'm sure he was like, this is my team. They brought me in here to start. And Will Howard, again, he was probably always in the trailing position, if you will, for that job. And that's, again, why what he did in 22 was so impressive, where he was – when he came in, that offense, it looked a little sharper. It looked a little more explosive and consistent. So him getting all the first-team reps and being the guy now, I expect him to take a jump because there's certainly room for improvement in his game. And as a result, I think this offense might have a chance to look a little better.
And going back to that offense, and hand up, we were excited about Adrian Martinez getting paired up with Colin Klein, and that matchup seemed to be a matchup made in heaven. And I just think Adrian Martinez's lack of ability to really push the ball downfield and bring that two-dimensional aspect to this offense really struggled. And looking at 2023, this team is not going to be a team that's going to air it out and throw the ball all around the yard. I think Will Howard has the arm to do it, but you take a look at where their impact players are. It's at that running back position, and it's the offensive line. And I want to start with this offensive line, who returns pretty much all the guys who played significant snaps for Kansas State in 2022. And a guy like Cooper Beebe, who during draft season, we were like, this guy's a top 50 pick in the NFL draft, decides to come back to Kansas State. looking around not only the Big 12 but the country, it's hard to find an offensive line as talented and as experienced as what the Kansas State Wildcats are bringing to the table in 2023.
Yeah. And the one thing about this O-line is it was good last year, especially in the run game. I think given that Will Howard now is the guy, and they're going to need to get a little better in the pass pro. That's where, again, like Adrian Martinez did make some plays for them when things broke down. And I did feel like against teams like Texas and against TCU in the Big 12 championship game, they did allow a little more pressure than you'd kind of think given how good this line is. But again, you're returning the 5 of them. They're really good in the run game. If they can just step up their pass pro game to that like next level, we are talking about probably one of the better offensive lines in the conference, if not the country.
Yeah, you said it best. This group, absolute road graders on the offense side. Like when you want to run the ball downhill, there wasn't really many better units in the country in terms of running the football. And I think that takes a little pressure off your offensive line and pass protection if you can keep it third and manageable and stay on schedule, right? When you get into those 3rd and 8s, 3rd and 11s, when the defense kind of knows you're throwing the football, can pin their ears back and get after the passer, that's when offensive lines who struggle in pass protection really struggle. If Kansas State can be that program like they were last year that stays on schedule, 3rd and 4s, 3rd and 3s, where you can run the ball, be two-dimensional, I think that'll help in pass protection. Now, you lose Deuce Vaughn. That is a massive, and I don't mean to be disrespectful at all to Deuce Vaughn. What he brought to this offense for the last couple of years at Kansas State was nothing short of special. What is really one of the most fun college players, you can call him wide receiver, college players to watch over the last couple of years. But Dill, you bring in a guy in Treshaun Ward who I am so high on, running behind a better offensive line than he saw at Florida State. This was a guy that averaged almost 7 yards per carry at his time at Florida State. He's a former walk-on. You pair him up with DJ Giddens, who's a pretty good running back himself. I still think you're going to have a pretty dynamic backfield in terms of running the football.
Yeah, and that was a huge get for them to land Ward because again, you were losing a ton with Deuce Vaughn, and you saw a little bit of Giddens last year, and I think he's a solid running back. I'm not sure you want him being the number 1 guy, especially right now, and given where they are and given how good this offensive line is and what they could be. So to get a guy like Ward, who again at Florida State was really, really good, and I think can, again, not totally replace Deuce Vaughn, but I don't know that the drop-off is going to be that big or as big as maybe people fear.
In terms of purely running the football, Treshaun Ward, there's not many people higher in the country than me with Treshaun Ward. I think what he brings to the table is phenomenal. I love the former walk-on chip on your shoulder. The one thing that is going to be hard for Kansas State to replace is what Deuce Vaughn was able to bring out of the backfield as a pass catcher, as kind of an offensive weapon and gadget. You look at this wide receiver, and that's kind of where, if you have a question mark about this offense, it is the playmakers in the passing game, right? You lose Malik Knowles, you lose Cade Warner. Those are kind of the 2 guys that when you needed a play downfield, that's who you were going to. They need some guys to step up, and you also lose Deuce Vaughn. Who do we think stepping up for Kansas State heading into 2023 here?
And that's going to be the tough part because, again, Phillip Brooks is excellent at what he does in terms of being a slot guy and doing this thing. So he's big time in that role, but it will be who can take that number 1 role that Malik Knowles kind of had locked up. And you saw RJ Garcia make some plays in that Big 12 championship game against TCU after Malik Knowles went down. Keegan Johnson, again, coming over from Iowa, talented player, didn't play in 22 with the injury, but had good moments as a freshman. So again, you don't really know who the number 1 guy is going to be. And if no one emerges, I am kind of convinced you need a number 1 guy in college football, especially if you're going to be an effective team throwing the football. But I think they have, again, guys in the chamber to do it, and kind of young guys, maybe unproven, but again, I liked what I saw out of Garcia, and Johnson's going to be an interesting player too.
Yeah, I would for this. I think in specific offenses, you need a wide receiver 1, or at least it really helps your offense to have that guy when, hey, we need a play to be made in this passing game. You can go to a guy. This Kansas State offense, I don't think it's as imperative that there is a wide receiver 1. I think this group is going to be a little bit more of a committee. And you noted Phillip Brooks, really good at what he does. He's good after the catch. RJ Garcia, if you're asking me who can be a potential wide receiver 1, it's probably him. Like, he's flashed some serious stuff. And then Keegan Johnson, again, a guy you noted really highly recruited guy out of high school, played well at Iowa as a true freshman, and that's hard to do in Iowa's offense. And then just was banged up in 2022. This pass catching group, I don't think is going to have a wide receiver one. I think it's going to be a committee. But for what this Kansas State offense wants to do, I'm really not too concerned about this. I think this will be one of the better offenses that we see in the Big 12. And I think the biggest part of this is being able to run the football, stay kind of on schedule, because it's not going to be the most explosive offense, but it's going to be a very efficient offense. And that's kind of Kansas State's recipe. I want to move to the defensive side of the ball, because this is when you talk about losing some production. That's where they got hurt hard. Like losing a guy like Felix Anudike-Uzomah it's going to hurt, Dill. In this front seven, how do we see this shaping up, specifically getting after the passer?
Well, that's the thing. Felix Anudike-Uzomah was probably one of the best linemen we've seen at Kansas State in a while. I think Higgins is a huge loss to me. I thought he was really productive, especially in that nose guard role, that he wasn't just a space eater. I mean, he'd go make plays. He was just productive in doing what they did. And again, I actually think their edge play will be fine. I think Khalid Duke is solid. I think Brendan Mott is really, really good. I think they'll be okay there. I'm more worried about what they're going to do stopping the run, and can they have because Ben Higgins, I just felt like was a big part of what they were doing in terms of playing in that nose guard role and being effective. You don't really know who you have at this point.
Yeah, my take on this Kansas State defense, and it's kind of similar to the conversations we had about, I hate to keep going back to Iowa, but when we were talking about Iowa's defenses, it's much more of a schematic defense than it is relying on players. And that's not to disrespect Felix Anudike-Uzomah, who was just so good for Kansas State, but this is a defense that you watch them on tape, they kind of can scheme up pressures. And I think you ask, where are they going to get the production in the pass rush? I mean, guys like Austin Moore, guys like Daniel Green coming from that linebacker spot are dudes that can blitz that A-gap, can blitz on the outside as well. So, yeah, you don't have a guy that, okay, he's going to be able to just win his one-on-ones consistently. Probably don't have that this year, but I think this Kansas State defense has done a really good job of scheming up pressures. And we talk about this a lot. On the defensive side of the football in college football, there's nothing more important than having linebackers who can make up for a lot of other weaker areas. And there's not many better linebacker duos than Daniel Green, who's coming back for his 6th year, and Austin Moore, two guys that find the football at an exceptionally high level.
Yeah, and that is true, because Daniel Green, again, he's been a guy I feel like we've been talking about for
we were banging the table for this kid last year.
Like ultra productive, ultra solid. And again, you are right in saying that they do scheme up pressures, and they play that like kind of positionless defense a little bit more than certain teams. And I like that. Again, I do think you're discounting some of their losses. You still need horses, and again, it's not to say they won't have them, but there's monster shoes to fill. Yes. I do think you're right in the saying that the linebackers will make up for some of it, but to be what they were last year, they're still going to need to get something out of some of these defensive linemen. Again, looking at Brendan Mott to step up, he played a fair amount last year. I thought he was solid. He looked like he was a little undersized and maybe get a little bigger and as he develops, not a super old or.
I think this defense might just be undersized, but it's a fast group that can kind of stretch the field, and you're not going to see that many offenses in the Big 12 that are going to want to go heavy on you and run it down your throat. Like, it's much more of a speed conference on the offense side of the ball, and I think that's why Kansas State has had so much success on the defense side of the ball, because they're a little bit undersized. And I think if they had to play Michigan or Penn State, some of those bruising teams in the Big 10, maybe they struggle. But what they lack in that size, I think they really do make up with the speed that they have on both levels. And going to the cornerback spot, you lose a guy like Julius Brents, who I was very high on in the 2023 NFL draft. But looking back, they have plenty of guys who can play at a high level in this cornerback room. I think it's a deep group. The thing that stood out to me is it's a long group. It's a long group of athletic guys that can get their hands on the football. This is a group that had a lot of interceptions, averaged almost 2 turnovers per game last year. I kind of look for that to continue, because the caliber of athletes I think they have in that cornerback room, although you might not be able to point to one particular guy after losing Julius Brents, I think it's there.
Yeah, and one thing you do notice is that it's a younger group. I mean, you got two guys in Paris Jacob and BJ Payne who played really good football as true freshmen. So, like, you got see them take a step kind of in that year, which again, like to play that early, especially at a Kansas State team that's not recruiting those 5 stars like Georgia is, those two make like big strides. You're looking at two really good players. Again, Kobe Savage, been around for a while.
That's what I like about it. You noted it best. You have some younger cornerbacks, but then you have that veteran in Kobe Savage, who I thought could have went to the NFL draft. He decides to come back. Having that veteran safety presence, I think, is going to be really big for this back end group.
Yeah. So I don't necessarily expect this defense to be bad. I will say I do think like to lose some of those guys up front will. I know that they don't run the ball as hard in the Big 12, but it is what it is. When you have two guys leave who are that good and you have some really good corners out too, it's going to be tough probably to be quite as good. But again, given Kansas State's track record and given what you saw from some of the younger guys and guys who are staying, especially in the linebacker room, it will be a really good unit. It always has been at Kansas State.
All right, looking at this schedule and talking about how Kansas State can kind of run it back in the Big 12, I really like how this schedule shapes up. You have two non-Power 5 teams in Southeast Missouri State and Troy. And if this team, and Troy's a good team, but if this team is as good as we think they are, I think they win those 2 games. You go on the road to Missouri, which is a team that I'm a little bit higher on than most of the national media. I still think Kansas State's probably a team that can win that game. You get the newcomer from the Big 12 at UCF at home. I don't want to play them at the bounce house. And then Oklahoma State, Dill, we're about to preview them too, but I think that's a very winnable game on the road. This is a big one. Texas Tech, Saturday, October 14th. I don't think it's crazy for Kansas State to roll into that game, going to Lubbock, Texas at 5-0. That's going to be a massive game when you talk about getting back to a Big 12 title game and potentially making the college football playoffs.
Yeah, and given what I kind of expect from Oklahoma State, I do think Missouri is probably the toughest game on that schedule. Yeah. Kansas State pounded them last year, so I don't necessarily expect Missouri to beat them. I do think it's probably their toughest game to date to that Texas Tech game, but there's no reason to make me think that they're not going to beat Missouri again.
And then to finish out the schedule, I think you're looking at Texas Tech and TCU. You get TCU at home, but we talked about it. I mean, Kansas State and TCU had some battles. I think that'll be a very close game. Getting that at home will be nice. And if you can be an undefeated team, a top 15, top 10 team going into that game, I really like that home field advantage. This is the big one. You miss Oklahoma on your Big 12 schedule, which is big. You go on the road to Texas, and you talk about like getting to a Big 12 championship game. That's going to be a game that I think you got to have highlighted if you're Kansas State. And if you do want to make a Big 12 title game, that probably does have to be a win.
Yeah, and that'll be one of those, even just for the sake of the program. Like those are the games that Kansas State wants to win to kind of solidify their role in the conference and in the national landscape, because Texas Tech's a good win, but it's kind of more of a regional win. When you play the Texases of the world, or you play, I mean, they don't play Oklahoma this year, but when you play that type of team, 100%. That's when you can, like, those are the upsets, or not even upsets necessarily, but the games you win that get the fans really excited. Huge wins for like Klieman and his legacy. So it'll always be big. And again, they're not that far away from them. I know Texas is a bigger national brand, if you will, but they're really tight in terms of how competitive these games are.
Yeah, looking at the schedule, I mean, I think the range of outcomes, you're probably looking at 8-4 is probably a floor. I think this team will still be very good, and I think the ceiling is 10-2, 11-1, because you, again, going through the Big 12, like if you are a consistent team, and there's not many more consistent teams than Kansas State, every game is winnable. And even on the road at Texas, I think with Texas being so up and down, I think you can win that football game. Kansas State, a team that I don't know if they're my favorite to win the Big 12, but they're certainly in the top 4 because of how good they were last year and some of the guys they have coming back. Excited for this Kansas State team, and the Big 12 in general is just going to be a blast. Like, there are going to be so many good games. So again, excited to talk about that when the fall comes. Appreciate you guys checking us out again. Let us know in the comment section if we're sleeping on some players or you guys got some takes. We appreciate you guys checking us out, and we'll talk to y'all later.